The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Water. It's an essential element for life and an essential element for agriculture. On today's Farm Connections, we take a closer look at clean water management on farms. Where it comes from, how it's used, and where it goes. We travel to rural Kasson to a discovery farm, which is a site for research on farm water usage. Stay tuned to Farm Connections and learn a lot more about one of our most basic elements, water.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections on KSMQ, sponsored in part by the Cedars of Austin, a senior living community. We even have a retired farmers club. Independent, assisted, and memory care apartments. Learn more at cedarsofaustin.com. Will Mahler, the ag attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for 37 years. Will Mahler, the ag attorney's office, is in Rochester, and Will is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.
The purity of our water supply is a serious concern for everyone. Whether you're in big cities, small towns, or rural areas, substances like phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment are being found in our water and are having a negative impact on our rivers, lakes, and wetlands. How do these substances get there? There are a number of answers, including urban developments, lawns, parks, and golf courses, but also from farmland. It's critical that farmers understand how their operations affect our water supply. Let's see what Minnesota farmers are doing to address this concern.
Impaired waters is a major concern in Minnesota. There's many rivers and lakes that have high nutrient levels and high sediment levels. Excessive phosphorus leads to eutrophication in lakes and algae blooms. Looking at agriculture, we really need to understand what kind of levels are coming off of those types of land uses.
Anything that leaves this landscape, leaves this field, is going to end up in a river someplace, which is going to eventually end up into the Mississippi, which is going to eventually end up in the Gulf of Mexico. It all starts up here, and a lot of people are pointing the finger at agriculture in this part of the world as being a cause of the problem in the Gulf of Mexico. And we actually want to know what's leaving the landscape. Rather than guess, rather than model it, we're going to get actual numbers from fields like this throughout the state of Minnesota. Discovery Farm is a working farm that simply allows us to go in to measure what's running off the surface, and then we monitor what's coming through the tile line. So it's a working farm where we actually go out and take whatever practices the farmer's using and monitor what's going on. We don't tell them what to do. We simply come out and monitor the end result of what they are doing.
The goal of this project is to provide water quality data that is useful to the farmers of Minnesota. Something they can use and look at and say, we're doing a good job, or there might be some areas we need to improve upon, but this program can show us some of the numbers that give us some proof of what we're doing. We have 10 current locations and we're going to 11, and we go all the way from southeastern Minnesota up into the Red River Valley, so we get a really vast, diverse set of farming operations and landscapes as well.
We measure, first of all, the weather conditions. So we measure the rainfall and the humidity and the temperature, and then the soil characteristics, such as the soil moisture and soil temperature. And then with our equipment, we're also monitoring the flow that comes off the landscape. And then we send water quality samples to a lab, and we test them for different forms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and then sediment.
By gathering information directly from farmers, it's like they're telling the non-farm public their story, because we retell it after we've gathered that information. And it also allows us then to share with the farmer, if they've identified through that process an area they see for improvement, we can help line them up with resources to help solve those problems.
Some of the things a farmer could do if they have high sediment and phosphorus losses is installing a grassed waterway or a buffer filter strip, filtering that water before it gets to the point where it enters the ditch or the stream. There's other methods for tile water where you use a structure to hold back the water for reducing nitrogen losses, or introducing different types of crop in your rotation.
Some of the more interesting things that we're learning are just how impactful precipitation and weather is.
That was Stearns County, July of 2011. I believe there was about a 5-inch rain event in a short period, and it just, a field can only take so much water. Once it's capacity, the water's just going to run off the surface. And those once-a-year events or once every couple of year events that are 5-inch rain events, they contribute 99% of the sediment and oftentimes even phosphorus nutrient loads. So it's really one event can drive the majority of your losses for the entire year. Our ultimate goal is to improve the water quality of the lakes and rivers in Minnesota. Everybody can make a change. It's not like we've ever monitored zero at any field or any other land use. There's always some nutrients in the water, there's always some sediment. So everybody can do their part. We can improve these rivers and lakes.
We're trying to tell people what we've learned so far. And things are going to change from year to year, but that's okay. But we've got to start telling the public, telling the world what Minnesota farmers are doing with respect to nutrient management and soil stewardship in this state.
Now, to get a global view of the Discovery Farms program, I spoke with Warren Formal, who serves as its executive director. He explains why farmers like the Discovery Farm program and are cooperating to gain factual, real-world information to help make good decisions on the farm and beyond. Warren, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here, Dan.
We want to hear all about Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center and what you do.
Sure. We started out as an idea about 5 years ago when a group of farmer leaders in Minnesota wanted to get more engaged and begin a more in-depth research and education program around water quality issues. And so we started as a real simple, just one-person shop, and we've grown into what you see today with Discovery Farms and Green Star Initiative is all part of our program.
Why do farmers want to know what's going on in the landscape?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think part of it is just wanting to know how they can be the most sustainable and do the very best job on their farm that they can. Farmers have a long history of processing and using production-related information, and they're good at processing that. And in the last decade, we've begun to do water quality work, and now there's this whole new world of research and data that's available. But it really hasn't been assimilated into farmer lingo yet. And so by working with farmers and sharing water quality data that comes off real Minnesota farms, they can then begin to look at it and say, oh, there's some things there that support what I've been doing, that reinforce the decisions I've made, but maybe there's some other areas where I could make some improvement. And we can work with them then to try to find answers to their questions.
And why is the time right?
Well, I think we're all aware that society is placing a great deal of interest and value on water. And here in Minnesota, we've got a lot of water resources, a lot of concern about what activities that people do, how they affect those water resources. And it's not just agriculture, it's urban impacts and other development impacts. But certainly the ag piece is something that we can address. We're building a team that includes experts, kind of folks that you've been talking to today, who each have a different perspective on agriculture as it relates to water issues. But by bringing those people together in a team, we can begin to look at water issues in a whole new way.
So you've got this team, you're collecting the data. What are you going to do with it?
Well, first and foremost, it's for the farmers. This is, farmers fund our work. Farmers have invested through their checkoff programs to help us do this work. And so our number one priority is getting the data assimilated into and organized into a type of information that's useful to them, and then getting the information to them. And that's really the number one focus of our program. The next level is to take that information about what farmers are doing and share it with non-farmers who have concerns about what's happening on Minnesota farms. And we can tell the story that, about what individual farmers are doing on their farms to address water quality issues and to really be the best they can be.
Can other people besides the farmers funding the research use the data?
We think so. I think it can be applicable for a lot of folks. In the Discovery Farms program in particular, we try to find farms that are typical for a region or for a type or a subset of agriculture. And certainly, even on any given farm, the data is really only telling you what's happening under the conditions at that time. What happens on a Discovery Farm field in 5 years will be different. What happens next year will be different because the season will be different. But the more we can pull that data together and try to line up, the type of rainfall events or snowfall events and how did that affect water quality in that given system, and help farmers understand that over the long haul, then that should be able to allow them to look and say, well, in my part of the state, this is what usually happens, and here are things I can do to minimize risk. Not just environmental risk, but also production and economic risk.
Impressive. You're passionate about your work. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
Research specialist Tim Raddatz from the Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center shares what he does to help Discovery Farms collect information and put it to use. Let's listen in. Tim, we'd like to hear what you do with this project, and tell me your name and where you work.
Well, I'm Tim Raddatz. I'm a research specialist for the Discovery Farms program here in Minnesota. And our Discovery Farms program is a farmer-led water quality research and educational program. Our main challenge, our main goal is to provide water quality data that's useful for producers in the state of Minnesota.
And what do you specifically do in this job?
Well, I help administer the program with George Ream, and pretty much what we do is take direction from a steering committee, which is comprised of a number of producers throughout the state and also representatives from ag organizations. And they provide general direction and guidance for our program, identify research needs, and select projects and cooperators for us to do our research on.
So what does that steering committee and the other stakeholders hope to gain from all this hard work and data?
Well, a lot of people, a lot of the farmers where we're doing our research on, they think they're doing the right thing environmentally. They have a number of best management practices installed. Their farming system, they believe, is the best they can do environmentally. So what we're doing is collecting some numbers to see where they're at, either validate or see if we can make some changes to improve some of our sediment and nutrient losses.
Sounds like somebody's forward thinking and trying to be objective. Is that true?
Yes, yes. Trying to be very proactive in terms of the water quality discussion.
So who are some of the team players that you work with?
What sets our program apart, we're not just a water quality research program. Our program focuses on farmer leadership. So I talked about that steering committee before. That is one example of farmer leadership in our water quality program. But also our farming cooperators, the guys and gals that were collecting data from their fields. We really lean hard on them to really inform us when we collect these numbers. They inform us of their farming system and their local landscape and weather conditions, and we use that information to relate those numbers that we're collecting into an educational program so we can go around, give presentations on what we're learning. Some of their knowledge and insights really helps to link those two programs. We also work with a number of ag organizations in the state. We want to get a feeling for what they want to know. What are some of their concerns? What are they looking to have more knowledge and more data on?
Well, if I understand some of your colleagues, there's farmers actually lining up to be Discovery Farms, and there's only room for so many. Why would a farmer want to participate?
Because they want to know. Like I said before, they think they're doing the right thing, the best thing that they can on the landscape, and they want some numbers to validate that. And so what we do is we can come in and collect some of that information and either validate and say, yeah, we're doing about as good as we can, or maybe there's a few tweaks or some changes we can make those numbers even better.
Wonderful. Wealth of information. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks, Dan.
The key to any research project is the quality of information collected. Within the Discovery Farm model, a great deal of care is invested into the handling, gathering, and interpretation of data. To understand the data management practices of Discovery Farms, I visited with two people involved in the process, Scott Madison of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and Blaine Delazer, a technician with the Dodge County Soil and Water Conservation District. Well, at the Discovery Farm near Kasson, Minnesota, lots of research is happening, and with us to help explain that research and what's done with the data are two experts. Blaine, what do you do and what's your title?
I'm a conservation technician with the Dodge Soil and Water Conservation District, and basically I'm here for maintenance and pulling samples from this site.
Thank you. Scott?
Hi, I'm Scott Madison. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I'm a hydrologist. I work with the installation of the equipment, the maintenance, just making sure everything's running correctly. And then MDA, we develop standard operating procedures so that all Discovery Farms are monitored in the same fashion across the state.
Is this information sent to you by satellite, by internet? How do you get a hold of it?
We have cellular modems at all the sites that the data is downloaded every hour to a database. And then we're able to upload that database actually to a new website, discoveryfarmsminnesota.org. And if you look on that website, there's a weather stations link, and you can find all this data, the weather data and the flow data, real-time data now.
Wonderful. How does it work?
Well, to start out with, we determine the size of our watershed. In this case, it's about 14 acres of surface water that flows to this point. What we do is we install an earthen berm along the edge of the field, and we determine the low point in the field. And that's where we install this fiberglass flume. The flume is really just a funnel for all the water to go through. We've got a couple different instruments in the flume that measure the stage of the water. And then we have a data logger in this instrument shelter here. And that data logger, it records the stage of the water every minute, and that stage data is converted to flow. So once we start calculating flow, the data logger accumulates that. And what we have for each site, based on the size of the field, it'll sample at there's an auto sampler, they'll sample this site every 3,000 gallons of water that goes through the flume. So in this sampler here, there's 4 1-gallon containers, and every 3,000 cubic feet, it sends about half a cup of water into that gallon jug. After 24 pulses, that gallon jug's full, and then it moves on to the next bottle. So what it's called is flow incremented sampling. At the end of the sample event, Blaine will come out to the site, he'll mix up the bottle, he'll pour it into lab bottles, and then we'll send that off. And then we calculate the load, the total amount of nitrogen or total amount of phosphorus that came off during that event, just by taking the total amount of water that we measured, multiplied by the concentration in the sample water.
And what the plume is monitoring is surface runoff.
Right. So we're monitoring 14 acres of surface flow with this particular flume. And then we're also monitoring tile drainage. There's pattern tile in this field. It's also the same watershed area, so we have about 14 acres of pattern tile. That tile comes through this agri-drain structure right here. We also have an instrument in that structure that measures the amount of flow going through. And it's the same thing. We also have an automatic sampler that will trigger based on the flow. And the more flow there is, the faster the sampler will run.
Are you actually measuring the differences in nutrient content from surface to subsurface?
Right. So we have 2 automated samplers, one for the surface and one for the tile. So we are separating out the tile and the surface flow.
And Blaine, how do you know when to come out here and do work?
Well, basically whenever there's an event, the system will trigger. When Scott gets into the office in the morning, he can check the computer, and if it's necessary for me to run out, he'll give me either a text or a phone call or an email, and I'll run out here and grab samples. And then after sampling, I reset everything to make sure everything's functioning according to the standards and is all ready for the next event.
It sounds like you're doing a lot of cooperation and collaboration. Is that a safe assessment?
Very safe assessment, and it's what's needed to be done.
Thank you. And Scott, what's your goal here?
Well, our goal is to find out what's coming off of typical farm fields across Minnesota. With the Discovery Farms program, we're doing the monitoring from 5 to 7 years for each field. So if we do identify high nutrient levels or high sediment levels coming off the farm field, we're going to try to work with the farmer or cooperator to reduce those levels and looking at different BMPs. So it's ultimately to look to see what's coming off the landscape and, if necessary, put in BMPs to improve the water quality.
Are you monitoring tillage, crop grown, dates, and correlating it to waterfall and also what's coming off the ground?
Right. As part of the program, MAWRC, they collect all the agronomic data, land practice information. MDA, we collect all the precipitation, water quality, water quantity data. At the end of the year, we sit down, try to put everything together and try to make sense of it.
Have you seen anything emerge as trends?
It's difficult to say at this point because our program is so new. We're just entering our third year. We started out with 5 fields 2 years ago, expanded 7 fields last year, and now we're at 10. But we're still really just starting to look at the data. And I guess what we have seen is there are a lot of differences across the different farming practices of what we see for nutrient and sediment concentrations and loads.
So you're looking for best management practices that can later be educated to farmers?
If necessary, we'll work with the producer. Yes, if they believe in that, then we'll try to promote that and see what kind of differences that implementation will do.
Are there other industries that are monitoring water and soil profiles to the same degree that you are with the Discovery Farm project?
If you look at larger watersheds like rivers and lakes, I mean, Minnesota has one of the best monitoring networks in the United States. I mean, the amount of rivers and lake monitoring there is. But when you get to this scale, the farm field scale, 5 to 20 acre plots, there's really not a lot of that research out there. So it is kind of unique.
Well, thanks for the good work you do, and I'm looking forward to seeing the data. Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, Blaine. Appreciate your time. An important quality of Discovery Farms is that it's led by farmers. Let's listen in while I visit with an educator for the Minnesota Ag Water Resource Center. Jeremy Geske explains how he takes the information to farmers to help them use management practices to improve water quality. Jeremy, thanks for joining us. We want to learn all about what you do.
Very good. Well, I'm new on staff with the Minnesota Ag Water Resources Center. My role is a watershed education specialist, which means I'll help to share what we've learned so far through the Discovery Farms program, and as well as our other research initiatives, share that back with farmers, and then implement a new initiative that we'll just be starting here this summer, and hopefully gather more information on the good work that farmers are already doing in terms of soil and water conservation practices.
And your goal?
Well, my goal is to have farmers participate in our new program that we're starting, the Green Star Farms Initiative, which is a simple self-assessment tool that farmers can evaluate their own soil and water conservation practices. And for them, what a farmer would get out of it would be kind of an educational assessment of their own farm, potentially identify areas where they could do an even better job and help identify resources to make that happen. For us as a center, we then can gather aggregated conservation data that we can use when we talk with the environmental community on what they think should be done and what we know farmers are already doing.
What would motivate a farmer or a farm producer to want to work with your program?
Well, a couple things. One is our program, there's no government agency involvement. It's all farmer-led. It's for farmers, developed by farmers, and it'll be completely confidential. And it's a way that they can gather their own information about their farm, and they can help provide us with the information we need to share, in terms of an aggregated information that we can share with the general public about the good work that farmers are doing in terms of conservation practices.
But as a general aggregate, can that data be used to make good decisions on a policy level or a policymaker's level?
Well, that's the goal, because there's a lot of interest at our state capitol to implement various regulations, and we have a lot of anecdotal information about what's being done, but we don't have a lot of actual data. And so part of my role then will be to get enough farmers around the state participating in our self-assessment that we can start to compile that information and then share that with lawmakers and others as far as the good work that is already being done, and perhaps then they won't feel the need to pile on more regulations.
Well, I'm impressed with the farmers being proactive. Can you add any more to that?
Well, I think that's the most important part is you know, this whole program that we're working on is all farmer-led. It's all paid for by farmer investments in their commodity organizations that they belong to, and really to demonstrate you know, to everyone out there that farmers are committed to taking good care of their soil and water. And participating in things like Discovery Farms and our new Green Star Farms initiative, as well as a number of research projects that are being done on farms. You know, that all shows farmers' commitment to the protecting our resources.
Why do farmers care about protecting our resources?
Well, to me, that's fairly obvious. As our farms, you know, for most of us, as we grew up on a farm, we want to pass that farm to the next generation. And we want to make sure we've done a good job of taking care of it, so it'll be there for our kids and grandkids and on down the line.
And I'm thinking farmers use and drink the same water that everyone else does.
Absolutely. You know, that's one thing I've said at meetings all the time. You know, we live here on the land, we breathe the air, we drink the water. Our kids breathe the air and drink the water. We're just as concerned about protecting it as anybody else.
Great points, Jeremy. And good luck with your project.
Absolutely.
And thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you for joining us on Farm Connections. I hope you learned something about agriculture that helps you appreciate and understand the complexity of producing food, feed, fuel, and fiber. I hope you will make your own connections with farmers in our area and will join us next time on Farm Connections.